So it's been over a year since this run was first suggested to me, and since then I've gotten many more suggestions to do a run like this. And I also really want to try this type of run myself because, well, lately I've been in the mood for magic runs. And this run gives me a perfect excuse to do a caster build in Dark Souls 2 without making things too easy. The idea of the challenge is simple. I must beat every boss I fight with the worst damage type, meaning whatever type of damage they are most resistant to. There is no single worst damage type. It's a case-by-case basis. Since this mostly involves elemental type damage, I'll be sticking to spells for this challenge. To mix it up a bit, I will be using a different spell for every boss, meaning once I use a spell to beat a boss, that spell is gone for the rest of the playthrough and I cannot use it again to beat any other bosses. I may use as many spells as I want on a single boss, but if I do this, every spell I use will be eliminated after that boss, so I need to manage my spells carefully. For basic enemies around the world, I'll just keep a few basic spells on hand. I'm not checking the defenses of every individual enemy in the game, just checking for the bosses will do. I've also added a couple of extra rules to add a little more spice to the challenge. The first one is I have to earn upgrades on my Catalyst by defeating certain landmark bosses. These bosses are the 4 Great Soul Carriers and Velstadt, who guards the King's Ring. Special weapons can only be upgraded to +5, so that one is easy. I get 1 upgrade for each landmark boss. And normal weapons go to +10, which is also conveniently divisible by 5, so that means I get 2 levels on a standard Catalyst for every landmark boss defeated. Lastly, I'm only going to level the relevant stats for my build, such as Intelligence, Attunement, and Faith. I'm not putting any levels into health, stamina, or even ADP, but I may use equipment to increase certain stats if I wish. I'm just not going to increase them so much that I can tank through everything. With all the rules out of the way, it's time to get into the challenge, so let's do it. I'm not really worried about the first Dragon Rider. Not only is he not resistant to anything, but we'll get to fight a couple more of these guys later on, so I'm gonna cheese him for his souls. I'll use some of those to buy Lightning Spear from Lycia, and the rest will go towards my first leveling goal of 20 Int and 20 Faith. As I explore No Man's Wharf, I'll be sure to pick up Emit Force. In Dark Souls 2, this miracle does lightning damage, so we'll get to test it out on some lucky lightning-resistant boss later on. After making sure I've unlocked all the shortcuts, I need to make my way towards the first spell trainer, Kerillian. I've already used up all my soul arrows just by clearing out the enemies in the level, which means buying another copy from him is one of my first priorities. I don't think he'll go to Majula until the Flexile Sentry is dead, so next up is our Pyromancy trainer, his pupil Rosabeth. Felkin also exists, but he's not going to talk to us yet, so we'll clear out Huntsman's Copse and speak with him again later. There isn't much of interest here as a mage, but we can pick up Soul Spear for later use, and even though there isn't a lot for us in terms of loot, the level design really lends itself to playing as a caster. A mage is good at catching ambushers in the act and sniping them before they have a chance to react. After we've gone through the whole level, we have more than enough souls to meet the stat requirements for Felkin's shop. We can afford to buy a couple hexes from him, those being Dark Orb and Resonant Soul. I'm gonna sacrifice Dark Orb from the main spell pool and use it as a generic spell alongside Soul Arrow to clear out regular enemies. That way I have 2 types of damage to work with, and way more casts, so I don't have to run out of spells so often while I'm progressing. So let's see how hexes hold up against the Dark Resistant Pursuer. All of the variants of Resonant Soul are strong in general, so even with resistance like his, the damage is not so bad. I like how I consistently miscalculate the spacing on this specific attack by the same amount every time. Alright, well, that's a one-time encounter, so we'll have to beat the last giant for a second chance. In the meantime, I'm gonna buy Soul Spear Barrage and Great Heavy Soul Arrow to take out the Skeleton Lords. Soul Spear Barrage is one of those spells that's very situational. At point blank, every spear will connect for some pretty decent damage. But anywhere from mid-range and beyond, its only use is for crowd control because of how sporadically the spears spread out. I screwed up the first couple of attempts because of this. If I didn't save Barrage for the big group of skeletons, I would run out of spells and have to restart. It's certainly not a good sign that I've already used up all my herbs before I even get past the Skeleton Lords. I definitely want to head towards the Bastille next. The first step is defeating the last giant for the Soldier's Key. Once again, like a lot of early bosses, he isn't resistant to any of the elements, so we'll just use a Great Soul Arrow to keep things simple. Thankfully, I picked up Rouge Water from somewhere because a lot of my cast decided to ignore the lock-on and hit the floor. It might have been a better idea to quit out and save that item for something more difficult, because while I did get 2 Amber Herbs back, I'm not entirely sure it's even equivalent to a Rouge Water. This reminded me to start working on attunement, because eventually I'll get extra casts for all my spells, which means this problem will gradually alleviate itself. As for the Pursuer, Resonant Soul starts with a lot of casts already, so we probably won't even need any herbs based on how our damage was looking before. The arena itself is also much better for a caster. We have plenty of space to run away and no falconers to worry about. I had enough souls on me to finish the fight without any issues, so now we can move on to the Lost Bastille. On second thought, I think I'm going to take care of the Flexile Sentry first, and get Kerillian to Majula. The Flexile Sentry is weak to fire already, so even though it would get a small boost to fire defense from being in the water, it probably wouldn't really be enough to make a difference, so I stuck with magic for this one. Obviously, this was very easy with Great Soul Arrow, and we can get our first Pyromancy, as well as the Pyromancy Flame, before heading to the Lost Bastille. Okay, so putting the spells in storage was supposed to make it easier for me to keep track of which spells I've used, but this idea backfired already. I was gonna drop Great Soul Arrow in there, but then I saw that I already had a copy in storage, which means I had already used it before and just forgotten about it. I know the last giant fight, which I used it on, was only like a couple of minutes ago when watching the video, but when this footage was recorded, I was jumping back and forth between this and the final stages of the one-shot contest, so a few days had already passed and my brain was like scrambled eggs. This was supposed to be a chill challenge to cool down from all that one-shotting stuff. But just because the rules are simple doesn't mean I can go around breaking them. I said 1 boss per spell, so that's what I'm gonna do. Well, I know from my NG Plus video that the Flexile Sentry returns with 2 lovely shadows after Bonfire Intensity 2, but this time I'm gonna have an even better time dealing with them since I'm not leveling health in this run. The overall strategy to the fight is still gonna be the same. I can't really make any mistakes though. I still need to focus on isolating the shadows from each other and the boss to take them out one at a time. But it's not as easy to do that with the slow cast time of Great Heavy Soul Arrow. Thankfully, we can fix that. All we need to do is go to the Shaded Woods to get the Clear Bluestone Ring +1. This should give a noticeable boost to our casting speed, and even if it doesn't, the placebo effect will at least give us a confidence boost. A clean headshot will finish off one of the shadows, and with one target down, we can afford to be more aggressive towards the second one. But in the end, it's always dumb luck that pushes me towards victory. I see that this shadow made a miscalculation in spacing as well. I was worried I wouldn't have enough herbs for this, but would you look at that? It turns out I had the exact amount needed. Oh, come on! Must I always take everything into my own hands? Well, since this is a penalty, I think it's only fair that I get rid of the extra souls as well. I still have plenty of souls in the form of soul items, so our stats are still looking pretty good. I'll use whatever's left to buy some pyromancy from Rosabeth. And now I suppose we're off to the Lost Center. Besides the Pursuer, she's the first boss to have a true elemental resistance. As the vessel of the Old Witch Soul, it's to be expected that she's quite strong against fire damage. Even then, the damage the pyromancy is doing isn't that terrible. It's actually decent compared to what I was expecting. The biggest problem I was having was getting used to the different animation for combustion. I don't often use this spell in DS2, so it's always a little off-putting to come back to it after getting used to the faster version used in the other games. I used all the pyromancies I had for this one fight because I have enough trouble finding openings to heal, so I don't want to be stopping to munch on herbs too much here. I didn't have many problems once I got back into the flow of her movements. Even with low ADP, this fight wasn't that bad. Not only can we get lots of levels afterwards, but we also unlocked our first tier of upgrades. To reiterate, that's +2 on normal weapons and +1 on special weapons. I'm gonna buy just about everything Strayed selling, then we'll go ahead and try another one of the bosses we missed earlier. How did you even get down there? Can you imagine? How stupid can these enemies be? I can't wait to cheese this stupid boss. Ha ha, you can't hit me. Well, I still survived, so I can just keep healing and hitting it again. You know what? Forget it. It took me too long to even get rid of all the skeletons for that to be worth the grind. I'm going the other way. We have another dark resistant dude over here, so I'm just gonna repurpose Dark Hail and find something else for the chariot. Okay, so clearly this isn't really a ranged spell, so I'm gonna have to just be brave and get up in his face to cast. Really? Is that how it's gonna be? I get hit once, and you're just gonna threateningly jog towards me until I die? This guy is pursuing me more than the actual pursuer. Apparently it's always his turn, so God forbid I make a single mistake. I don't know what his problem was today. Apparently the guy still thinks he's defending Anor Londo. Now we can get a few more miracles and infinite access to Targray's finest bolt stones. And since I like free stuff, I'll go ahead and get Faith to 30, so Lycia will give me her spare equipment. The Covetous Demon is the first boss so far that's strong against lightning, so we'll be able to get some use out of the chime we just got. Heavenly Thunder is going to be the most efficient way to damage him since he's such a big target. Regardless of how little the damage of each bolt is, he's going to be eating 3 or 4 of them per cast. Just to spite me, he held off on his roll so I would waste one of my herbs. I think he's still mad about the one-shot contest. Luckily, Malincha still has a few left in stock, so after being a little more careful, he goes down easily on the next go. This is another area that's going to be a little easier than usual with spells. One thing I like to do here as a mage is catch this sneaky guy before he gets a chance to close the gate. Just make sure you're a little more prepared for the angry mob than I was. Once that's taken care of, we can also snipe the enemies trying to ambush us from the second floor to safely proceed through the level. There's also an extra copy of Lightning Spear under Pate. We could always use a few extra casts of that. Before we head to Mytha, it's worth it to take out all the desert sorceresses you can find as a mage. They have a high chance of dropping Wilted Dusk herbs, which is the best of all the herbs. Mytha actually has 2 resistances, lightning and magic, absorbing 50% of the damage from each. I chose magic this time around because lightning is a rarer damage type, and since sorceries are in such abundance, I wanted to make sure I don't run out of lightning damage so early. The spell I have right now is not great, so I'm gonna head back to Shaded Woods to pick up Homing's Soul Mass. The intelligence requirement to get all 5 orbs is higher in DS2 than in the other games, but we do have 4 already, which should do decent enough damage to Mytha. She's not really that tanky. Now, I could always try the Ruined Sentinels for heavy Homing Soul Arrow to replace the one I have now, but to be honest, I just don't feel like fighting them, and besides that spell, there's no real reason to fight them in this playthrough. As you'd probably expect, the fight with Mytha isn't an eventful one. It's mostly a waiting game, both in terms of waiting for the orbs to fire and waiting for her to attack. She thinks she's clever, but I know what she's doing, trying to back up into the poison pools. As much as I think Gilligan's a dirty scammer, I have to admit I wouldn't be going anywhere in this run without his ladders. Apparently, if you have 5 vigor, the Silvercat ring is mandatory for even the smallest jumps in the pit. I'm going here next because I want to get a few more options for hexes in the gutter, plus the Rotten is free money as a caster. Of course, the Black Witch set is also mandatory as a caster. The Veil will be especially useful for bosses like Nashandra. Once I've made it all the way down the gutter, I'll pick up the Scraps of Life Hex, then I'll go back to Felkin to purchase Great Resonant Soul. The last step is to infuse my chime with Dark to get a better bonus for hexes. Scraps of Life is a big but slow AoE, so it's best to cast this in advance or wait for bigger openings. However, the fight is manageable with Great Resonant Soul alone. The Rotten doesn't have many punishes for ranged attacks, so consider it always your turn. As usual, no matter how strong the target is against Dark, the Resonant Soul hexes seem to ignore resistances. The Rotten is the second landmark target to be defeated, which means now we can upgrade regular weapons to +4 and special weapons to +2. We all know you didn't spend nearly that amount of souls to make this ladder, Gilligan. For Najka, I'm going to keep it simple and stick to Soul Spear. Since this is a stronger spell, her absorption combined with her large health pool cancels it out in a way that keeps the fight balanced. It's neither too strong nor too weak. As usual, all you have to do here is bait her tail swipe for a couple free hits. We'll have plenty of cast to finish the fight and move on to the next area. Not to mention, we can get a new spell from her soul. I'm also going to speak with Rosabeth again to upgrade the Pyromancy Flame to +4. And that's because the next place we're going through is Iron Keep. Unfortunately, I was not lucky enough to get the rare mask this time, and I'm not going to waste any time farming for it. It probably isn't really worth it in a run like this anyway. What I do need to get is Chaos Storm, which I only managed to reach in time by stacking fire resistance from the water pots and Flash Sweat. So, Old Iron King. This guy could be trouble. He's the first boss I've encountered that has a super resistance. He's rocking an 85% resistance to fire, so we're in for a long fight. I definitely don't have enough juice for this one. We'll have to revisit this one a little later. For now, I'm gonna go finish the other route and pick up some useful items along the way. Magus and friends all have resistances of their own, but since everyone in this room is a generic enemy, it's only fair that I get a freebie and use generic spells. As a little compromise, I'll use melee for the prisoners and save ranged attacks for the priests and of course the Magus. When all of them are dead, we can climb up to the attic and buy another copy of Emit Force. There's also a hidden butterfly here that will drop us a free herb. Now that it's been a while and I've gotten stronger, I think I'm ready to rematch the Executioner's Chariot. Once again, we're going to be using dark damage for this. Dark Storm is a great spell for a big burst of damage, but the cast leaves you really open since you can't move or perform any other actions during the AoE. Finding an appropriate time to cast this against a boss can be tricky. If you get too greedy, you can very easily die to a trap of your own making. For the Executioner's Chariot, the Darkness Spray attack is a perfect opening for this spell, and even if it takes a while, it's worth the wait in my case, since the skeletons absolutely tore my poor low-vigor character apart. And now for the most important reason for fighting this, Titchy Gren. I always appreciate a merchant who will sell me some cheap pyromancy. After that quick side quest, it's time to continue down the cove and get a few things done here. First, I'll assist Creighton to get the gauntlets, as always, and with my miracles already prepared, it's time to face Freya. She is pretty strong to every type of elemental damage, save for fire, but the one I went with for her was lightning since I have so many copies of Emit Force. The amount of cast I start out with may have even been enough on its own. I only ran out because the lock-on was acting weird and sending my shockwaves in all sorts of directions. On top of that, a lot of my cast simply missed her tiny head. It's surprisingly hard to hit with a straight line of fire. The flow of this fight as a caster feels identical to playing a melee build. She has lots of ranged attacks that cover most of the arena, it's common for attacks to bounce off her mandibles, and just like with melee, the majority of the fight is spent fishing for the laser and punishing from there. I personally still find ranged combat slightly easier, since you don't have to worry about getting clipped by the bite attack. Plus, catalysts leave one hand free, so we don't have to force the other spiders out of the way. Not only have we unlocked the next upgrade tier, but we can also get intelligence to 50 and swap out our current staff for the Staff of Wisdom. I'm probably gonna go ahead and head to the castle after this, but before that, I remembered to use the key I got after the fight to get Great Fireball and an extra Fire Seed. And I need to say that I have been gravely underestimating binoculars as a tool for casters. It makes certain enemies much easier to deal with, and is a great way to get guaranteed headshots. I just had a lot of fun with them this time, like a baby who's just been given a new toy. With the help of the binoculars, I sniped my way into Drangleic Castle in no time, which made quite an impression on the Chancellor who offered me only the finest of herbs. I'll quickly meet with Grandal a final time to join the Covenant and get the ring, another copy of Dark Orb, and a few of his other trinkets just for the hell of it. There's nothing remarkable about the Dragon Riders. Their defenses are identical to the first one, so we know they don't have any strengths against any element. For that reason, I'll play it safe and use magic damage again, just because it's the most populated category of spells. Our spells of choice here are Soul Shower from Najka, and Soul Vortex, which I picked up in the pit earlier. Both of the spells I've chosen are decent at gradually chipping away at the health of multiple targets, but first I need to try to get them closer to each other. I got pretty lucky with this, since the archer decided to jump down on his own for whatever reason, despite not switching to his melee weapon. Soul Vortex is a fun one, but it's definitely more suited to larger enemies. It also dissipates when it hits a wall, so unfortunately I can't make one big vortex around a small space to trap him in. When the orb in the middle connects, the other part of the vortex will linger for a bit and can stagger him twice in a row, which sets him up perfectly for another vortex. After we've cleared the first section of the castle, we can proceed and get some more items on the way that'll help us out. Kytha's Chime is the best one we can get for hexes before Nashandra, so that'll certainly be useful for some of the upcoming Dark Resistant bosses. Lycia has also upgraded her stock and now sells infinite lightning spears, which works out perfectly for me since the Looking Glass Knight is strong against lightning. The rain will lower his defense by an insignificant amount since the base defense is 70%, so I would assume even fire would heavily outdamage any miracle we choose. This doesn't apply to any of the NPCs summoned through the mirror. All of them are pretty weak and die in just a few casts, saving us the trouble of keeping up with all of them. It would be funny to do this one online. I can imagine how confused whoever he spawned in would be when they see me casting an 11th lightning spear at them after they dodged the previous 10. Now that I mention it, out of all the times I fought him online, I was never lucky enough to get a real player. And that's really weird because I got someone for Old Monk in 2024 on the very first try. Back to the current fight. I at least had the gauntlets to help me out a little, as in sometimes doing 68 damage instead of 45. But as I expected, I still had to pop an herb for this too. But what didn't go according to my expectations was not dying with 5 vigor and no ADP to bail me out of my poor dodging skills. I had a pretty risky moment of greed at the end, but for once my dodging skills did not fail me, and I was able to finish the fight then and there. I'll go ahead and pick up Soul Bolt to replenish the spell pool a bit, then start working on evening out my stats. Great Combustion works surprisingly well against the Old Iron King. Despite how much of it he absorbs, it's still doing yellow damage. The only downside to using this is that it's a melee spell, so you don't get the perk of skipping the waiting game like you usually would when casting. But I'm willing to be patient, since I'll need a few breaks to use my herbs anyway. It's okay, don't panic, this attack won't kill. Are you seriously going to do this to me after I spent 20 minutes here? I don't even have to say anything, the comedy writes itself in these runs. Alright, I suppose it's time to take a little break from that. Why don't we just fight Smelter Demon first? This could very well be a waste of a precious pyromancy, but on the other hand, the extra levels we can get out of these souls won't hurt. I'm actually quite impressed with how well I did on this. I think the last challenge I did trained me to deal with all its patterns. Smelty can have some confusing hitboxes, but as long as you get the timing down, you can do it even without the extra ADP. But of course, if I had the choice, I would always choose ADP over no ADP. The fire resistance on this guy isn't quite as daunting as Old Iron King, so Great Combustion will be a little more effective. I also find melee on this fight easier, since dodging its attacks relies a lot on circling around the sword and hugging the side of the boss. Sometimes all you need is a little change of pace in a run like this. Throwing yourself at the same thing repeatedly can quickly dull your mind. Switching targets helped me rebound from that upset with him earlier, and changing to Great Fireball was my way of preventing another 20-minute fight. The damage is quite a bit worse compared to Great Combustion, but the DPS is still better, because this is a fireball, so I throw it when I want to throw it, and however many times I want to throw it. I don't have to entertain his slow-paced nonsense. I also brought Flash Sweat for extra security in case I get caught in another laser scenario. I see I made the right decision. That's 4 out of 5 of the landmark bosses down. Only one more to go before we can upgrade weapons to max level. I see no reason to stop there. Let's head to Velstadt and complete the set. First, we'll have to clear out the Shrine of Amana, which was no problem thanks to my trusty binoculars. Yeah, how does it feel being sniped? Bet it's not so fun, is it? Quick note, don't attack first on a boss you're not sure you can take a single hit from. It's really easy to get cocky on this boss, but it has a few sneaky combos to catch matchers. Since its highest resistance is a tie between lightning and fire, we'll go with fire due to the small bonus to defense given by the water in the arena. Fire Whip may not look like it's doing much, but each tick of damage adds up quickly. Don't be deceived by the small number on each individual hit. As long as you stay patient and wait your turn, the demon will be vanquished in no time. We'll now be proceeding into the minimally guarded crypt, where the mindless king and his loyal knight reside. And what fun is exploring a royal crypt without a little plundering? Our damage versus Velstadt is looking surprisingly promising. He is very strong to dark, but I don't consider 50% to be a super resistance. We don't have all 5 of the orbs, but the damage is still ending up at over 200 against his non-buffed self. And even after the reduction from his buff, I would still say the damage is passable. I got a little too comfortable with the damage and forgot the golden rule of this fight, which is to never heal in his face. Always take the risk and wait out another attack. Think about it. Your options are to heal and get punished, resulting in your death, or have a chance to dodge correctly and maybe get a chance to heal after that. The choice is yours. In my case, the orbs made the choice for me. I thought I was dead, so I'm as surprised as anyone else that this worked. Thank you, Manus? After everything, it turns out I have been getting a slow trickle of agility from leveling attunement, so maybe it wasn't skill after all. My stock of spells is rapidly depleting, so my next destination is the DLC areas to get whatever I can find lying out in the open. We've got a couple in Aleum Lois, and there's a few more in the other 2 DLC as well. But first, I'm gonna try Ava to get a feel for our damage against DLC bosses. Her highest elemental resistance is magic, which is only 37%. That doesn't seem too bad, but DLC bosses in general are tankier and supposedly have a hidden spell resistance stat. So this will give us an extra challenge as a caster. I genuinely am running out of magic, so I'm testing out a few options to see what works best here. Soul Bolt is pretty similar to the Dragon Breath spell in DS1. Definitely not an optimal choice for an agile tiger. I'm getting deja vu from my last encounter with the Sanctuary Guardian. It's probably best that I hold off on the DLC bosses a little longer. For now, I'll resume my spell collection in the Sanctum City and pick up that other clutch ring. As I prepare for the Guardian Dragon at the Ritual Site bonfire, I make a quick trip down the stairs for Soul Geyser. There wasn't anything particularly exciting about this fight. It's technically resistant to fire, but it's so weak that you might as well just use whatever you want. One of its brethren will give us yet another variation of Firestorm, and with that area more or less completed, we can start getting our intelligence to 64 to use Soul Geyser. Since it's spells we need, if we fight the Dark Lurker now, it's spells we'll get. I'm not going to fight all of the optional bosses in this run, just whichever ones are guarding something necessary or ones that I feel like fighting. I would say Dark Lurker is a little bit of both. I am interested to see how this fight will go. You'd never guess it, but Dark Lurker is strong against dark damage. For that reason, we'll be using the Dark Greatsword Hex we just picked up. It's similar to the one brandished by the Dark Lurker, except that it releases a projectile when swung in the same fashion as the Moonlight Greatsword. When both parts of the spell connect, even a dark-resistant target like Dark Lurker will get hit pretty hard. Despite having the projectile, I mainly try to stay close and treat this like a melee fight. For the most part, the fight felt pretty fair. It was only when the clone showed up that there started to be some issues. This fight can be pretty punishing on characters with low vigor, so it's very easy to get roll caught by one after taking a hit from the other. The best thing to do is run away and get both of them to chase you. You can easily trick one of them into doing a laser, or even better, a melee attack, while you have a chance to get some free damage off the other one. There's nothing wrong with a small dose of opportunism. Just make sure to keep the one you aren't attacking in the corner of your eye at all times. That way you can anticipate upcoming attacks and heal as needed. With the Dark Lurker complete, we can collect our rewards from the pile. Grandal will give us Climax and his Dragon Chime, and Strayed will trade the Dark Lurker's soul for another Hex. Life Drain Patch is functionally similar to Pestilent Mist. It releases a small AoE that does damage to anything in its path, including the caster. The downside is that it costs a lot of souls to use, and will do a lot less damage if you can't pay the price for the cast. Plus, the casting time is really slow. But I will say this, even if it has a price, you can stack these on top of each other, which you can't do with Pestilent Mist. Moving on, there's a few more spells we need to pick up. We'll get some from completing assassinations, and another from the second DLC. There's also some good rings for fire resistance in here, which we'll need for the next boss. And last but not least, we'll take the sorcery clutch ring. 19.8k HP and 85% fire resistance. How many firestorms do you think it'll take to get to the center of the ancient dragon? I'm dead serious about this. In fact, I'm using every variant of Firestorm on this boss alone, because I don't think I would have enough herbs otherwise. I'm confident in my ability to tank through its fire breath, but I didn't really think about the physical damage. Okay, so the new plan is, don't get hit. If I can stay in rhythm and keep my cool, or I guess stay heated, this will be the easiest 30 minutes ever. Almost as if to make up for its absurd health and ridiculous damage output, the Ancient Dragon has very telegraphed moves, and staying in the same spot between his toes lets you script the whole fight. From here, he can only do two things. In my experience, the pattern is always the same. Assuming you are in position at his foot, he will always start with a stomp, so it's best to wait for this before attacking. After he does a stomp, he won't do another one until he's gone through a full cycle of attacks. The next attack in the pattern will either be his standing fire breath, which he telegraphs by stepping forward, or his flying fire breath, which he telegraphs by flapping his wings before takeoff. Since both of these attacks are so easy to anticipate, simply react accordingly, then quickly reposition by his foot, and wait for a stomp to signal the start of another cycle. If he chooses the standing fire breath, you can keep casting until the animation is over, and if he chooses to fly, just keep running towards his tail, being careful not to get hit by it when he lands. Expending all of my firestorms is only enough to do maybe a quarter of his health, so if you ever try something like this, I suggest putting on your favorite playlist. Personally, I enjoy the music in this fight, so I didn't mind having a 30-minute loop of it, but any longer than that would have gotten old fast. Certainly not as old as doing the actual fight, though. To answer my own question, it took around 90 casts to take this guy down. Like all the giants, the Giant Lord is not strong against any type of damage, but rather is highly susceptible to dark damage, so we're free to choose from all the other types of damage, and since it's been getting neglected, I chose lightning. To make it a little more challenging, I chose a weaker lightning spell instead of Great Lightning Spear to make up for the fact that there is no worse damage type for this. Splintering Lightning Spear is a spell that I have yet to find a good use for. The only thing I can think of is maybe for PvP. I suppose it could be a way to catch other players off guard or to hit them from above. But for PvE, this spell is lackluster. I really don't know what the point of animating all those spears raining down was if it only hits once. Surely there was a less deceptive way to demonstrate its area of effect. Another thing about this spell I find odd is how close you have to be even when locked onto your target. The rain of lightning doesn't necessarily appear right above the target. Sometimes it spawns right in front of them, so an enemy like the Giant Lord has to lean in to get caught in the AoE. Kind of a slow fight. I wouldn't suggest using this spell in regular combat as a caster. Once again, our stats are almost evened out, with only attunement still falling behind. With all 5 giant souls in my possession, it's time to revisit the crypt and take on Vendrick. Vendrick is a tanky one, so we're using only the best hexes to bring down that massive health pool. While I may be using the worst damage type, which is dark damage in this case, who says I can't try to get the most out of the damage that I can do? Climax is such a ridiculous spell as it is, that as long as his resistance isn't something like 85%, you'll barely even notice the difference, especially when applying Unleash Magic on top of everything else. The main problem here will be having a sufficient supply of soul items to use for each cast, since in exchange for its crazy damage, Climax demands all of your souls, not just the 5,000 it requires for max strength. I brought all the souls I had to this fight, and that wasn't enough, so as painful as it sounded, I was prepared to attempt to use the reduced damage version to finish off that last chunk of HP he had left. But of course, he cut that plan short, but I consider it to be an act of mercy on his part. Farming souls is one thing. Farming soul items, though, that might be too tedious for me at this point, especially for an optional boss that has no benefits outside of dropping more souls. I swapped Climax for Dark Dance, which still consumes souls, but not your entire stock, which is infinitely more manageable. All I had to do to get the 100k souls I was carrying was do a run through Dragon Shrine, killing all the Dragon Knights, which is actually a lot easier than it sounds. Dark Dance is a close-range spell that starts with an AoE, then creates 5 orbs that look like they should be long-range, but aren't. I wasted some of my souls trying to hit from a distance. Even if the souls I have aren't enough, the damage reduction at 0 souls for Dark Dance is much less dramatic than it is with Climax. The initial AoE will do the same amount of damage, but the amount of orbs will be reduced from 5 to just 1. However, this isn't a big deal for me since I came prepared with lots of spell recovery items. My biggest concern is not getting hit. This definitely wasn't the worst thing in the world. I'd take anything over fighting him without giant souls again. Vendrick's quick reflexes reminded me that there's still room for improvement in regards to casting speed, so we're paying the Skeleton Lords another visit for what should be a massacre. On their side, I mean. We've got the same old spells with new and improved gear, which didn't speed things up as much as I'd hoped. But back to the main path, we've got our improved clear bluestone ring, so the next thing on the agenda is to replenish our stock of herbs after Vendrick took his toll on them. We don't have to farm these from the desert sorceresses anymore, since Aldia's Keep is open. We have a guaranteed supply of them, along with the bonfire ascetic that's usually farmed from here. In addition to the 2 wilted dusk herbs dropped from the hollow, we get 1 twilight herb outside the mansion, and 1 crimson water from a corpse for every ascetic we burn. Do that a couple times, and we'll quickly have enough spell recovery items to take on another boss. The boss I'm choosing to challenge next is the Throne Duo, mainly because I want Nashandra's Chime. The highest resistance of either of them is 50% to magic, which only applies to the Watcher, but since all the other resistances are the same across the board, I'll just use magic for the Defender as well. I have quite a few options to test out here, starting with Soul Greatsword and Focus Souls. Soul Greatsword is my high damage melee option, which is useful here since they tend to just block any of the ranged spells you throw out. Focus Souls can do lucrative damage when used correctly. If they have their guards down, we're talking up to 1,000 damage each. But it is pretty slow, so usually I would have to sacrifice myself for a chance at that kind of damage, which defeats the whole purpose. The final lineup of spells ended up being Soul Bolt and Homing Crystal Soul Mass, the same combination I tried for Ava. This fight is a much more appropriate situation for Soul Bolt, since they both can get caught in it if they're lined up. Crystal Soul Mass is a good support spell that keeps one aggressor at bay with a stagger, so I don't have to be overwhelmed while setting them up for Soul Bolt. Soul Bolt itself is also good for staggering them, and in the end, it even contributed to my victory. After feathering out, our gear has been rearranged to accommodate hexes for Nashandra, because, of course, being a child of dark herself, vestiges of the abyss disturb her little. Even so, Life Drain Patch eats away at the darkest of souls without a problem. About a quarter of her health was gone after just 2 casts. I got a little too caught up in the damage and didn't realize I was slowly dying in the exact same way. Next time, I was sure to dispel all of her curse wells before casting, but I did make an exception on one occasion as I willingly took a risk to cast it twice in a row. I just had to see the damage. I did somehow survive after that. Maybe I just got lucky, but I don't know. I think that getaway was pretty smooth. I don't have any souls, so I couldn't do that again even if I wanted to, but luckily, I came prepared and brought Recollection as a backup spell to finish her off. This one doesn't cost anything, so we can spam as we please. Well, we can spam as we please during the laser. This spell is too slow to be spammable, but I'd say the damage is fair considering her resistance to dark. I'd attribute this victory to a healthy mix of patience and recklessness. I don't want to be rude, so I'll wait for Aldia to finish his speech before ditching. Now to get the thing I really came here for, the Chime of Want. That's all I really have left to do in base game, so we're gonna pick up where we left off with Ava. Soul Geyser is the best out of all our options, plus a larger target like her allows every part of the spell to connect easier. Openings are few and far between here, so I burned an ascetic back at Aldia's Keep to pick up a second copy and minimize the amount of time spent refilling spells. This fight's brutal with low ADP, so I can expect to take a lot of hits. Due to this, I didn't even bother with Unleash Magic since I can barely survive a single hit. Unsurprisingly, I ran out of Estus and had to rely on life gems for healing. As scary as it is to run around waiting for a chance to heal, I have to wait for the right time or all my hard work will have gone to waste. Of course I have to use an herb for her last sliver of health. Such is always my luck. Seeing her pouncing towards me from the other side of the bridge never gets any less terrifying. I did get the Fire Clutch ring after this, I just wasn't recording it for some reason. Right after this, I headed down to see how I fare against the Burnt Ivory King. The knights are definitely the most complicated part. They take up more time than the actual boss would. To make things more complicated, they don't have the same resistances either. Burnt Ivory King has equal resistances to every element besides lightning, which is his weakness. So once again, personal preference and spell availability are gonna be the determining factor in my choice. His knights, on the other hand, have fire and dark tied as their highest resistance. That's not too worrisome for me since I can just use Dark Orb again. I'm allowing it here since they aren't technically bosses themselves. I'm gonna repurpose the spells I initially tried against the Throne duo for the Ivory King. Focus Souls is slightly less impressive than it was earlier, and Soul Greatsword is decent. Overall, there's not much to say about either of these spells in relation to this fight, especially considering how effortlessly he chopped me down in a single slash. I'm gonna procrastinate on that one and set my sights on the other DLCs. Before I do that, I'll fight Freya again to get Crystal Soul Spear, just so I'm not stuck without any ranged magic options. For now, we're going back to dark damage and seeing if Alana's dark resistance will hold up against Climax. Thankfully, we can farm the large soul of a Brave Warrior soul item from a corpse in Aldia's Keep, so ammo is no longer a concern. The only question is, exactly how many will we need to kill her? Judging on the damage done to her before she's even done talking, I'd say not many. I could already tell I didn't bring enough the first time, but just like with Vendrick, I still wanted to tough it out with the weak version. At least with the first attempt, I have a good guess on how many soul items I need. My guess is around 6. I took out so much of her health this time that I almost feel like I would have won on this attempt if she didn't summon a Velstadt. No offense, but how could you choose Velstadt when the pigs are right there? It's probably a good thing that summons added a decent challenge to this fight, because this so-called worst damage type is probably doing more damage than the ones she's weak to. As long as I focus and take the time to get rid of the skeletons in my way, this should be an easy win. As if responding to my musing about damage outputs, the Fume Knight emerged from the ashes to show me what a real resistance looks like. His fire resistance is comparable to that of the Old Iron King and the Ancient Dragon. No matter how strong of a pyromancy I use, it might as well be warm water I'm throwing at him. That's why I've prioritized speed, although I wouldn't call Forbidden Sun weak in any other scenario besides this one. The reason it's such a good option for this fight is because of Fume Knight's ability to punish the player's actions, whether it's an Estus chug or an item use. Naturally, we're going to constantly return to neutral to refill our spells since Forbidden Sun has so few uses. This demands a good grasp of his moveset to capitalize on brief healing windows, and as much as it was a pain to do, the last time I fought him doing someone's brutal idea of an All Idols Alive Velstadt cosplay has allowed me to have the understanding I need to pull off another feat of endurance. There's always the mental pressure to think about as well. In Phase 2, he threatens a one-shot with his increased range and buffed sword, as just one misjudged movement could send us straight back to the beginning of this uphill battle. Even if the damage is a little worse, because I actually have freedom to use the whole arena this time, it took me half the time of the Velstadt cosplay fight. I still enjoyed this though. The Fume Knight's fast attacks help to alleviate the sluggish pace of my damage, which also helps to keep my senses sharp. In situations like these, it's best to not think about the numbers of health bar with damage. What helped me keep up my morale was seeing the number of casts as a group. So I would look at my progress in the sense of 3 casts worth of damage takes about this much, instead of seeing each individual cast. Sir Alon's next in our line of fire, literally, since he's also strongest against fire damage. Lingering Flame is slower than Forbidden Sun, but several of these can be planted in one spot for a huge explosion of damage. I seldom had time to cast more than one with how quick this boss is, but even though my own spell seems slow in comparison, unlike Fume Knight, Suralon can't really do much if you circle around to his back while he recovers from an attack. The biggest threat in this fight was the explosions themselves. The fire effect is so obnoxiously bright that it effectively gives Suralon a smokescreen that conceals his next attack. I realized this and tried my best to optimize their placement, but I can't make the explosions smaller, so I have to squint really hard and hope I guess right if I see his arm twitch. Thankfully, I got a stagger towards the end, and this sealed the deal, completing the second DLC. Sorry if you were hoping to see the blue smelter demon. I didn't have the resources or reason to fight it this time around. Maybe next time. Now then, let's claim Outcry from Nadalia's completed soul. I'm actually going to need it since Pyromancy is running low. The first thing I'll try it against is Sin. Unlike the other dragon fight, his fire resistance isn't super crazy, but it's still his highest resistance overall. While damage isn't looking quite so abysmal this time, partially owing to the fact that this spell also does dark damage, I only get to cast it twice before having to use an herb. And since I only use one herb at a time, that means after the initial herb eaten, I only get one cast before I have to refill again. Eventually, I switched to Fire Snake because Outcry was eating through my herbs like crazy. And while Fire Snake does less damage per cast, it comes with 4 casts, so that's still more damage overall in a shorter amount of time. As usual, most of my problems stemmed from Sin spending the whole fight running away from me, which is particularly annoying when he flies away during my cast. I had gotten him to the point where a single smack with the Pyromancy Flame would be enough to kill him, but instead I decided to close it out the proper way and use my remaining cast of Fire Snake. And can you blame me? Under no circumstances was this the wrong time to cast. There was absolutely no reason for it to miss, and yet it did. Thankfully, I was able to use some of my water and avoid getting hit by the fireball, only to get hit by his tail on the landing. Once again, I narrowly escaped death on the tail end of the fight, but this time I was lucky enough to get a perfect shot straight to his head, ending the fight much more gracefully than it had started. Of course, now that means I have no choice but to return to the Ivory King fight. It was mainly the pre-fight portion that I had been dreading, but now that I have Crystal Soul Spear, it looks like I'll be in a pretty good spot to finish this even after my friend dies. Bold of me to assume I'd be the last one to die. I used a spare Bright Bug to get through the first part, and since one of the knights didn't get the memo about closing up the portal before the big boss arrives, I had to waste some of the time it had left on a Pyromancer. But this time I got lucky with the one knight I had left. Despite getting ganged up on at the last minute, he had an above average amount of health for this point of the fight. I still had some time left on my Bright Bug by the time the Pyromancer was dead, though I might have accidentally cancelled it with the Elizabeth Mushroom. Since this is the second to last boss in the game, I might as well go all out and use all the Soul Spears I can manage while I still have a knight to keep him distracted. Once the Brave Knight was finally bested, I switched to melee to finish him off with Soul Greatsword. Actually, you know what? I've played it safe enough. Let's finish with Soul Flash instead. Also, it turns out the mushroom didn't cancel out the Bright Bug. It's still going strong, which will give weak little Soul Flash just the boost it needs to take out that last 200 HP. I guess that was an exaggeration. Aldia's been patiently waiting for me this entire time, which isn't a surprise since he never seems to be in a rush to do anything during the fight either. Outcry seems like it was made to be used against him, having the same split damage as his own Dark Flames, and like his Dark Flame, Aldia is most resistant to both dark and fire. Outcry is very strong anyway, so the damage still ended up being pretty good. No matter what kind of damage you use, the openings in this fight are always the same, since he has set windows for burnout. You could probably fit 2 casts in while he charges the fireball, but I went with 1 to be safe. After that, As long as you get as far away from him as possible, the fireball should miss. Well, I didn't lie, did I? Aldia picks the worst thing he could possibly do with his amount of health, giving me the victory and ending the playthrough. I appreciate everyone who stuck around to see this run play out in its entirety. From my experience, I don't think I can single out one elemental damage type as being the worst overall, but with enemies like Ancient Dragon existing, I can see where the fire damage argument comes from. As far as bosses are concerned, fire is the only element where more than one enemy has a resistance of 70% or above. But like every other damage type, it has its uses, so who can really say if it's the weakest overall? Feel free to share your experiences if you have a personal worst damage type, or even one that has weapons and spells that you just don't like. Thank you for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.